David Johnson stepped out of his silver BMW and checked his watch. 3:15 in the afternoon. He had exactly 45 minutes to get to the bank, make his deposit, and pick up his daughter from soccer practice. The parking lot of First National Bank was half empty, which meant he might actually get this done quickly. He grabbed his leather briefcase from the passenger seat and jogged toward the glass doors. His sneakers squeaked against the polished marble floor as he entered the cool, air-conditioned lobby. The familiar smell of coffee and cleaning products filled his nostrils. After spending the morning at his company's warehouse checking inventory, he hadn't had time to change out of his casual clothes. His jeans were clean but worn, and his gray hoodie had his company's logo embroidered on the chest. The bank was busy but not packed. A few customers sat in the waiting area scrolling through their phones. The soft hum of conversation mixed with the clicking of keyboards from behind the teller windows. David looked around and chose the shortest line, walking over to window 3 where a blonde woman in her 30s was helping an elderly customer. As he waited, David noticed the security guard near the entrance glancing in his direction. The man was tall and stocky, with graying hair and a serious expression. David had seen him here before during his previous visits, though they'd never spoken. The guard's eyes seemed to follow David as he moved, but David brushed it off. Security guards were supposed to watch people, right? The elderly customer at the window finished his transaction and shuffled away with his receipt. David stepped forward with a smile, setting his briefcase on the counter. The teller looked up at him, and her friendly expression seemed to freeze for just a moment. Her name tag read Lisa Chen. "Good afternoon," David said pleasantly. "I need to make a business deposit today." Lisa's smile looked forced now. "Of course. Do you have an account with us?" "Yes, I've been banking here for about 3 years now." David opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick envelope filled with checks and cash. "This is for my business account. Johnson Tech Solutions." Lisa's eyes darted to the envelope, then back to David's face. She seemed to study him more carefully now, her gaze moving from his casual clothes to his face, then to the money in his hands. "I'll need to see some identification." "No problem." David reached for his wallet and handed over his driver's license and business credit card. He'd done the same transaction dozens of times before, though usually he was dressed in a suit coming straight from client meetings. Lisa took the ID cards but held them at arm's length, squinting at them as if she couldn't quite make out the details. She looked back and forth between David's face and the photo on his license several times. "This says David Johnson?" "That's right. And you said this is for a business account?" "Yes, Johnson Tech Solutions. I'm the owner." David kept his voice calm and professional, though he was starting to feel a slight knot in his stomach. Something about Lisa's tone was different from his previous visits. Lisa continued staring at his ID. "I'm going to need to verify this information. Large deposits require extra security checks." David glanced at the envelope in his hand. "It's not that large. Maybe 8,000 in checks and about 2,000 cash. I've deposited similar amounts before without any issues." "Well, we have to be careful." Lisa's voice had gotten louder, and David noticed that the customer in line behind him was starting to look curious about the holdup. "There's been a lot of fraud lately, people trying to deposit checks that don't belong to them." The knot in David's stomach tightened. He looked around and realized that the security guard had moved closer, now standing just a few feet away and pretending to organize some pamphlets on a nearby table. "I understand you need to be careful, but these are all legitimate business checks. Some are from clients, others are from our company's petty cash account." Lisa held up one of the checks, examining it closely. "This one's from Peterson Construction." "How do I know you didn't steal this?" David blinked in surprise. In all his years of banking, no one had ever suggested he might be depositing stolen checks. "Because it's made out to my company. You can call Peterson Construction if you want. They're a regular client of ours. I might have to do that." Lisa set the check down and picked up another one. "And this one's from Martinez Family Restaurant." "That's a lot of different businesses writing you checks." "That's how business works," David said, trying to keep the irritation out of his voice. "I run a tech support company. We have clients in different industries. Restaurants, construction companies, retail stores. They pay us for our services." Lisa didn't seem convinced. She held up the cash next. "And where did this cash come from?" "Our petty cash account, like I said. We collect cash payments sometimes, especially from smaller businesses that prefer not to write checks. That's a lot of cash to be carrying around. Lisa's voice was getting even louder now, and David could feel other customers starting to stare. Most legitimate businesses don't deal in cash anymore. David felt his face getting warm. The woman behind him in line cleared her throat impatiently. The security guard was now openly watching their conversation, his hand resting on his radio. Look, I've been coming here for 3 years. I'm sure you have records of my previous deposits. This isn't unusual for my business. I'm going to need additional verification. Lisa turned to her computer and started typing. What's your social security number? David gave her the number, watching as she typed it in. Her frown deepened as she looked at the screen. This account shows a different address than what's on your driver's license. I moved 6 months ago. I updated my personal address but kept the business address the same because that's where my office is located. Lisa shook her head. That doesn't make sense. Why would you have 2 different addresses? David took a deep breath, reminding himself to stay calm. Behind him, he could hear the growing murmur of impatient customers. The security guard had moved even closer and was now standing directly behind David, close enough that David could smell his cologne. Many business owners have separate addresses for their personal and business accounts, David explained slowly. My home address is different from my office address. That's completely normal. I'm going to need to call my supervisor. Lisa reached for her phone without waiting for David's response. Mrs. Patterson, I have a customer here with some unusual deposits. Can you come take a look? David glanced at his watch. 20 minutes had already passed, and he hadn't even started the actual deposit yet. His daughter's soccer practice would be over in 25 minutes, and the field was a 15-minute drive from the bank. Is this really necessary? I'm just making a routine business deposit. Sir, I need you to remain calm. The security guard's voice came from directly behind David. The teller is just following proper procedures. David turned around to face the guard, whose name tag read Frank Wilson. I am calm. I'm just trying to make a deposit so I can pick up my daughter from soccer practice. Well, getting agitated isn't going to help the situation. I'm not agitated. I'm concerned about the time. David gestured toward the clock on the wall. This usually takes 5 minutes, but we've been at this for 20 minutes already. Frank crossed his arms over his chest. Maybe if you'd brought proper documentation, this would go faster. David stared at him in disbelief. I brought my driver's license, business credit card, and all the checks and cash for deposit. What other documentation do you think I need? Before Frank could answer, a middle-aged woman in a navy blue suit approached the window. Her name tag identified her as Mrs. Patterson. Supervisor. She looked at David with the same suspicious expression that Lisa had been wearing. Good afternoon, Mrs. Patterson said in a clipped professional tone. I understand there's some question about your deposit today. David nodded toward Lisa. Your teller seems to think there's something suspicious about my business deposit, but I've been making similar deposits here for 3 years without any problems. Mrs. Patterson picked up David's driver's license and studied it carefully. She held it up to the light, examining it from different angles as if checking for signs of forgery. Have you made any large deposits recently? Define large. I make weekly deposits of anywhere from $5,000 to $15,000. Depending on how much business we do that week. And you're saying this is all legitimate business income? David felt a flash of anger but kept his voice level. Yes, it's legitimate business income from my legitimate tech support company. Mrs. Patterson exchanged glances with Lisa, then looked back at David. We're going to need to verify some of this information before we can process your deposit. It might take a while. David looked at his watch again. His daughter would be waiting at the soccer field in 20 minutes, probably wondering where her dad was. Other parents would start arriving soon to pick up their kids. He'd never been late before. How long is a while? He asked. Could be 30 minutes. Could be an hour. Depends on how quickly we can reach your references. David felt the eyes of every customer in the bank on him now. The whispered conversations had stopped, and people were openly staring at the scene unfolding at window 3. He realized that to them, he probably looked exactly like what Lisa and Mrs. Patterson seemed to think he was. A suspicious character trying to deposit money that didn't belong to him. But he knew who he was. And soon they would too. Mrs. Patterson walked behind the teller counter and whispered something to Lisa that David couldn't hear. Both women kept glancing at him while they talked, and David felt his frustration growing with each passing minute. The clock on the wall now showed 3:40, and his daughter's soccer practice ended at 4. "Excuse me," David said, raising his voice slightly to get their attention. "I really need to finish this deposit. I have somewhere important to be." Mrs. Patterson turned back to him with a stern expression. "Sir, we're following standard security procedures. If you have nothing to hide, you should have no problem waiting while we verify your information." The phrase, "if you have nothing to hide," hit David like a slap. He'd heard those words before, usually right before situations went from bad to worse. Around him, other customers continued to watch the drama unfold. Some had their phones out, and David wondered if anyone was recording. "I don't have anything to hide," David said carefully. "I'm just a business owner trying to make a deposit so I can get to my daughter's soccer practice on time." Lisa picked up her phone and dialed a number. "Hi, is this Peterson Construction? I'm calling from First National Bank to verify a check." "Yes, I'll hold." David couldn't believe what he was hearing. "You're actually calling my clients? Do you realize how this makes my business look?" "We call to verify large checks all the time," Mrs. Patterson replied. "It's standard procedure." "No, it's not," David shot back. "I've made hundreds of deposits here over the past 3 years, and no one has ever called my clients to verify anything." Frank, the security guard, stepped closer again. "Sir, I'm going to need you to lower your voice. You're disturbing other customers." David looked around the bank. Several customers had given up waiting and left. Others stood in line looking annoyed, but they were all staring at him, not at the staff causing the delay. He realized that in their eyes he was the problem. "I'm not raising my voice," David said quietly. "I'm just trying to understand why a routine business deposit has turned into an interrogation." "Nobody's interrogating you," Mrs. Patterson said. "We're just being thorough." Lisa was still on hold with Peterson Construction, tapping her fingers impatiently on the counter. She looked at David and shook her head. "They're saying they need to check their records. This is taking forever." "Because it's unnecessary," David replied. "The check is made out to my company. The endorsement stamp is on the back. Everything is in order." Mrs. Patterson picked up the cash from David's deposit and started counting it slowly, making a show of examining each bill. "Where did you say this cash came from again?" "Petty cash from my business. Small clients who prefer to pay in cash." "What kind of business accepts this much cash?" Mrs. Patterson held up a $20 bill to the light as if checking for counterfeits. "Lots of businesses. Corner stores, small restaurants, hair salons. Not everyone likes writing checks or using credit cards for small amounts." "And you're saying these businesses pay you in cash for tech support?" "Some of them, yes. If someone's cash register stops working and I fix it in 10 minutes, they might just hand me $40 cash rather than write a check." Mrs. Patterson and Lisa exchanged another look, and David could tell they didn't believe him. The absurdity of the situation was starting to feel overwhelming. Here he was, a successful business owner who employed 12 people and had an annual revenue of over $2 million, being treated like a criminal for making a routine deposit. "You know what?" David said, reaching for his briefcase. "Maybe I should just go to another bank. This is ridiculous." "Sir, you can't leave," Frank said, placing a hand on David's shoulder. "We're in the middle of verifying your deposit." David looked down at Frank's hand on his shoulder, then back up at the security guard's face. "Am I being detained?" "We just need you to wait while we finish our verification process." "And if I choose not to wait?" Frank's grip tightened slightly. "I'd recommend waiting." David felt a chill run down his spine. The situation was escalating beyond anything he'd experienced before. Around him, other customers were pulling out their phones, some clearly recording now. He realized that whatever happened next would probably end up on social media within hours. Lisa finally got through to someone at Peterson Construction. "Yes, I need to verify a check written to Johnson Tech Solutions." "David Johnson." "Yes, I'll hold again." While Lisa waited on hold, Mrs. Patterson continued her examination of David's cash. She was now using a special pen to mark each bill, testing for counterfeits. The process was slow and deliberate, clearly designed to make David uncomfortable. "Ma'am," David said as politely as he could manage, "I've been banking here for 3 years. I have a perfect history with this bank. I've never had a check bounce or any other problems. Why are you treating me like this? We treat all customers the same way. Mrs. Patterson replied without looking up from the cash. No, you don't. David gestured toward the other teller windows. I've been watching other customers for the past 30 minutes. None of them had to provide additional identification. None of them had their checks verified with phone calls. None of them had their cash tested for counterfeits. Those were smaller deposits. The woman at window 1 just deposited what looked like a pretty thick envelope of cash, and your teller processed it in 3 minutes. Mrs. Patterson finally looked up from the money. Are you saying we're discriminating against you? The question hung in the air like a challenge. David knew that whatever he said next would be crucial. Around him, the bank had gotten quieter. Even the customers at other windows were listening now. I'm saying that I'm being treated differently than other customers, and I'd like to know why. Because your deposit raised red flags in our system, Lisa said, finally hanging up the phone. Peterson Construction says they did write you a check, but they need to verify the amount. They're looking through their records. The amount is right there on the check, David said, pointing to the document. $1,500 for network maintenance services performed last month. They said they thought it was for $1,200. David felt his heart sink. A discrepancy in the amount would make everything look even more suspicious. They're probably thinking of a different job. I did 2 jobs for them last month. One was $1,200, one was $1,500. That's convenient, Mrs. Patterson said dryly. It's not convenient, it's business. Peterson Construction is one of my biggest clients. I do work for them every month. Check your records. You'll see multiple deposits with their checks going back over 2 years. Lisa was already typing on her computer. I see several deposits from Peterson Construction, but they're usually for smaller amounts. Because those were smaller jobs. This was a bigger job. I had to upgrade their entire network over a weekend. And they paid you in cash and a check? No, they paid me with a check. The cash is from other clients. Mrs. Patterson set down the cash and picked up another check from the pile. This one's from Martinez Family Restaurant for $800. That seems like a lot for a restaurant. They had a complete system crash 2 weeks ago. Lost all their orders during the dinner rush. I worked until midnight getting everything back online. And you expect us to believe that a restaurant would pay $800 for computer work? David stared at her in disbelief. Yes, I expect you to believe that because it's true. When a restaurant loses their point-of-sale system during dinner rush, they lose thousands of dollars in revenue every hour it's down. $800 is cheap compared to what they could have lost. Frank, who had been quiet for the past few minutes, suddenly spoke up. You're getting pretty defensive about all this. I'm getting frustrated, David corrected. There's a difference. Frustrated people sometimes do things they shouldn't do. David felt a flash of anger. Are you threatening me? I'm just saying that everyone needs to stay calm. I am calm. But I'm also tired of being treated like a criminal when I haven't done anything wrong. Mrs. Patterson looked at her watch. It's been about 40 minutes now. Usually if someone's being truthful, they don't mind waiting for verification. David looked at the clock on the wall. 3:55. His daughter's soccer practice was ending in 5 minutes, and he was still trapped at the bank being treated like a suspect in some crime he hadn't committed. Other parents would be there to pick up their kids, but his daughter would be standing alone, wondering where her dad was. He pulled out his phone to call his ex-wife, hoping she might be able to pick up their daughter. But as he raised the phone to dial, Frank stepped closer again. Sir, I'm going to need you to put the phone away. David looked at him incredulously. I'm calling my daughter's mother to see if she can pick up my kid from soccer practice, since you people have decided to hold me hostage over a routine bank deposit. You can make your call when we're finished here. When will that be? Mrs. Patterson shrugged. When we're satisfied that everything is legitimate. David realized that he was completely at their mercy. They could keep him there as long as they wanted, asking the same questions over and over, making him prove his innocence for something he'd done hundreds of times before without incident. But he also realized something else. This couldn't go on forever. Eventually someone would have to make a decision. And when they did, the truth would come out. He just hoped his daughter would understand why Daddy was late. The glass door of the corner office swung open with a soft whoosh, and David looked up to see a woman in her early 50s walking across the bank floor. She had short auburn hair and wore a crisp navy blue business suit. Unlike everyone else he'd encountered that day, her face lit up with genuine recognition when she spotted him. David? she called out, her voice carrying across the lobby. David Johnson? Mrs. Patterson and Lisa both turned to look at the approaching woman, whose confident stride and warm smile seemed to cut through the tension that had been building for the past hour. Frank, the security guard, took a step back as she walked directly toward their little group at window 3. Ms. Rodriguez, David said, relief flooding his voice. Thank goodness you're here. Carmen Rodriguez had been the branch manager at First National for 8 years, and David had worked with her personally on several occasions when setting up his business accounts. She was one of the few bank employees who actually remembered his name and always greeted him warmly during his visits. What's going on here? Carmen asked, looking from David to Mrs. Patterson with a puzzled expression. Why is Mr. Johnson standing around with all his deposit material spread out like this? Mrs. Patterson straightened up, suddenly looking less confident than she had moments before. We were just verifying some information about his deposit. There were some irregularities that needed to be checked. Carmen picked up David's driver's license from the counter and glanced at it, then looked at the pile of checks and cash. Her eyebrows rose as she took in the scene. Irregularities? What kind of irregularities? Well, it's a large deposit, and some of the checks are from different businesses, and there's cash involved. Mrs. Patterson's voice trailed off as Carmen's expression grew more confused. A large deposit? Carmen looked at the envelope of money. This looks like David's usual weekly deposit. Maybe a little smaller than normal, actually. She turned to David with a smile. How's business been this month? I know you were worried about the seasonal slowdown back in February. Business has been good, David replied, still hardly believing that Carmen had appeared when she did. We picked up 3 new restaurant clients, and Peterson Construction has been keeping us busy with their expansion project. Carmen nodded knowingly. That's great to hear. And how's your daughter doing? Still playing soccer? She is. Actually, her practice ended 10 minutes ago, and I was supposed to pick her up, but... David gestured helplessly at the chaos surrounding him. Carmen's expression darkened as she began to understand what had been happening. She looked at Mrs. Patterson with new eyes. How long has Mr. Johnson been waiting here? About an hour, Mrs. Patterson admitted. An hour? Carmen's voice rose in surprise. For a routine business deposit? Lisa spoke up from behind the counter. We were just being thorough, following security procedures. Carmen walked behind the counter and looked at Lisa's computer screen, which still showed David's account information. Her frown deepened as she scrolled through the transaction history. Lisa, Mr. Johnson has made over 200 deposits at this branch in the past 3 years. His account has never been overdrawn. He's never had a check bounce. He's never had any kind of problem whatsoever. She clicked through several screens, and David could see recognition dawning on her face. In fact, his business account is one of our most active and profitable relationships. Johnson Tech Solutions maintains an average balance of over $50,000. Mrs. Patterson shifted uncomfortably. We didn't have access to all that information. We were just looking at today's deposit. Why were you just looking at today's deposit? Carmen asked sharply. Standard procedure is to review the customer's account history before flagging anything as suspicious. David watched as Carmen continued scrolling through his account records. He could see her getting angrier as she reviewed the timeline of what had happened. Let me make sure I understand this correctly, Carmen said, her voice taking on a cold, professional tone. One of our best business customers came in to make a routine deposit. Instead of processing it normally, you held him here for an hour, called his clients to verify his checks, tested his cash for counterfeits, and had security treat him like a potential criminal? Frank cleared his throat. We were just doing our jobs, ma'am. Carmen turned to look at the security guard. Your job is to protect our customers, not intimidate them. She walked back around the counter to David, and her expression softened. David, I am so sorry about this. This should never have happened. I just want to make my deposit and go pick up my daughter, David said quietly. She's probably wondering where I am. Carmen immediately turned to Lisa. Process Mr. Johnson's deposit right now. All of it. And do it quickly. Lisa's hand shook slightly as she began entering the deposit information into her computer. The confident, suspicious demeanor she'd maintained for the past hour had completely evaporated. Yes, ma'am. While Lisa worked, Carmen pulled David aside. I want you to know that this is not how we treat our valued customers. Something went very wrong here today, and I intend to find out what. David nodded, watching as Lisa finally began processing his checks and cash with the speed and efficiency he'd expected from the beginning. The entire deposit took less than 3 minutes to complete once she actually started doing her job. "Here's your receipt," Lisa said quietly, barely making eye contact with David. Carmen walked with David toward the exit, continuing their conversation. "I'm going to need to file a report about this incident. Would you be willing to speak with me about what happened here today?" "I suppose so," David said, glancing at his watch. "But right now I really need to get to the soccer field." "Of course. Why don't you go get your daughter, and I'll call you later this evening. We need to make this right." As they reached the door, Carmen stopped and turned back toward the teller windows. Her voice carried across the lobby. "Mrs. Patterson, please see me in my office immediately." "Lisa, you too." David could see other customers throughout the bank turning to look at the commotion. Some were still holding their phones, having recorded parts of the confrontation. The story would probably be all over social media within hours. He pushed through the glass door and jogged toward his BMW, grateful to finally be free of the stifling atmosphere inside the bank. As he drove toward the soccer field, his mind raced with everything that had just happened. His phone rang as he pulled into the parking lot at the sports complex. He could see his daughter sitting on the bleachers with her soccer bag, one of only 3 kids left waiting for their parents. "Hello? David, it's Carmen Rodriguez. I wanted to call and apologize again before you heard about this from someone else." David parked his car and waved to his daughter, who immediately brightened when she saw him. "Heard about what?" "I've just spoken with our regional director, Robert Hayes. He's driving down from the downtown corporate office right now to investigate what happened today. This kind of treatment of our customers is completely unacceptable." "I appreciate that, Carmen, but I really just want to put this behind me and move on." "I understand. But there's something else you should know. Your business relationship with our bank is much more significant than I think Mrs. Patterson and Lisa realized." David frowned as he watched his daughter gathering her things. "What do you mean?" "The corporate office has been trying to expand our business banking division. Your company, Johnson Tech Solutions, is exactly the kind of growing business they want to build relationships with. In fact, there's been discussion about offering you a comprehensive business banking package that could include payroll services, equipment financing, and a business line of credit." David felt a chill run down his spine. "Are you saying I was being considered for some kind of special business relationship?" "More than considered. Robert Hayes has been planning to reach out to you next week about potentially consolidating all of your business banking with us. The relationship could be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars annually to our bank." David sat in his car, staring out at the soccer field where his daughter was now walking toward him. The magnitude of what had almost happened was starting to sink in. If Carmen hadn't appeared when she did, if he'd gotten frustrated enough to take his business elsewhere, the bank would have lost far more than just his weekly deposits. "Carmen," he said slowly, "I think we need to have a longer conversation about this." "Yes, we do. And David, Robert Hayes is going to want to speak with you personally. This incident could have very serious consequences for the people involved." As David got out of his car to greet his daughter, he realized that the next few days were going to be very interesting indeed. The bank employees who had treated him like a criminal were about to discover just how big a mistake they had made. His daughter ran up and hugged him. "Dad, why are you so late? Coach was starting to worry about you." David hugged her back, grateful for the simple moment of normalcy after the chaos of the past hour. "I had some trouble at the bank, sweetheart, but everything's going to be okay now." As they drove home, David couldn't help but wonder what would have happened if Carmen hadn't walked out of her office at exactly the right moment. Would he still be standing at that window trying to prove he was who he said he was? Would Frank the security guard have eventually called the police? He shook his head, trying to push away those thoughts. Carmen had appeared. The truth had come out. And soon everyone involved would understand exactly what they had done. But first he had dinner to make and homework to help with. The rest could wait until tomorrow. David was finishing his morning coffee when his phone rang at 8:30 the next morning. The caller ID showed Carmen Rodriguez's direct line at the bank. "David, I hope I'm not calling too early. Do you have a few minutes to talk?" "Sure, what's going on?" "Robert Hayes arrived at our branch last night around 6 o'clock. He spent 3 hours reviewing security footage and interviewing everyone who was involved in yesterday's incident." Carmen's voice sounded tired, as if she'd been dealing with this situation all evening. "He wants to meet with you this morning if you're available." David set down his coffee cup and walked to his home office window, looking out at his quiet suburban neighborhood. What kind of meeting? He wants to personally apologize for what happened and discuss how we can make this right. He's also very concerned about the potential impact on our business relationship. Carmen, I appreciate the concern, but I don't want to make a bigger deal out of this than it needs to be. David, with respect, this is already a big deal. What happened yesterday violated several of our internal policies and potentially violated federal banking regulations. Robert needs to address this formally. An hour later, David found himself back at First National Bank, but this time he was being escorted through a side entrance directly to Carmen's office. The main banking floor looked different in the morning light, busier, more energetic, with customers moving efficiently through their transactions. Robert Hayes turned out to be a tall, silver-haired man in his early 60s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He stood up immediately when David entered the office and extended his hand with a genuinely apologetic expression. Mr. Johnson, thank you for coming in. I'm Robert Hayes, Regional Director. I want to start by offering my sincere apologies for what you experienced yesterday. David shook his hand and sat down in one of the chairs facing Carmen's desk. I appreciate that, Mr. Hayes. Robert sat back down and opened a thick folder on the desk. I've spent considerable time reviewing the security footage from yesterday afternoon, and I've spoken extensively with Mrs. Patterson, Lisa Chen, and Frank Wilson. What I saw and heard is completely unacceptable. He pulled out several printed pages from the folder. In the past 3 years, you've made over 200 deposits at this branch. The average deposit amount is between $6,000 and $12,000. Yesterday's deposit of $10,000 was actually on the lower end of your normal range. David nodded. That's what I tried to tell them. Furthermore, Robert continued, I reviewed security footage of other customers making similar deposits on the same day. A woman deposited $15,000 in cash and checks at window 2. Her transaction took 4 minutes. A man deposited $8,000 in business checks at window 1, 3 minutes. Your transaction, which was completely routine, took over an hour. Carmen leaned forward in her chair. Robert, show him the comparison footage. Robert turned his laptop screen toward David. The security video showed split-screen images of 2 transactions happening simultaneously. On the left, David could see himself standing at window 3, while Lisa examined his identification with obvious suspicion. On the right, a well-dressed white businessman was making what appeared to be a similar deposit at another window. This gentleman deposited $12,000 in mixed checks and cash, Robert explained. Watch the difference in treatment. David watched as the other customer's transaction proceeded smoothly. The teller smiled, processed his identification quickly, and completed the deposit without any additional verification. The entire interaction took less than 5 minutes. I don't need to see any more, David said quietly. Robert closed the laptop. The disparity in treatment is undeniable. And it gets worse, he pulled out another document. Frank Wilson's security report from yesterday claims that you became agitated and potentially threatening during the incident. However, the audio from the security cameras tells a completely different story. Robert pressed play on a small recorder on the desk. David heard his own voice, calm and professional throughout the entire ordeal, even as the situation escalated around him. At no point did you raise your voice or behave inappropriately, Robert said. Yet Frank's report suggests that you were the problem. David felt a knot forming in his stomach. So what happens now? Several things. First, Mrs. Patterson has been placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. Her behavior yesterday was completely contrary to our policies and her training. Carmen took over the explanation. Lisa Chen has been suspended for 1 week without pay and will be required to complete additional customer service and sensitivity training before she can return to work. And Frank Wilson? David asked. Robert's expression hardened. Frank has been terminated. His security report contained false information, and his behavior toward you was intimidating and unprofessional. We can't have security personnel who treat customers like criminals. David absorbed this information silently. 3 people's lives had been significantly impacted by their treatment of him, and he wasn't sure how he felt about that. There's more, Robert continued. I need to discuss the business implications of what happened yesterday. He opened another section of his folder. Johnson Tech Solutions is exactly the kind of growing business that our bank wants to build long-term relationships with. Your company's revenue has grown by 30% over the past 2 years. You employ 12 people. Your accounts maintain high balances and generate significant fee income for us. David shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Mr. Hayes, I hope you're not suggesting that I should be treated better than other customers just because my business is profitable. No, absolutely not. Every customer deserves to be treated with respect and professionalism. But I want you to understand the full scope of what almost happened yesterday. Robert pulled out a thick proposal document. Our business development team has been preparing a comprehensive banking package for your company. Business checking, payroll services, equipment financing, merchant services, and a substantial line of credit. The total relationship value could exceed $300,000 annually. David stared at the document. You were going to offer me all this? I was planning to call you next week to schedule a presentation. If yesterday's incident had driven you to take your business elsewhere, we wouldn't just be losing your weekly deposits. We'd be losing one of our most promising potential business relationships. Carmen leaned forward again. David, what happened yesterday wasn't just wrong. It was incredibly short-sighted from a business perspective. Robert nodded. Which brings me to my next point. How do we make this right? David thought for a moment. Honestly, I just want to be able to come in and do my banking without being treated like a criminal. That's a given. But I think we need to do more than that. Robert closed the folder and looked directly at David. I want to implement new policies and training, procedures to ensure this never happens to you or any other customer again. But I'd like your input on how to do that effectively. What do you mean? You experienced firsthand what it feels like to be on the receiving end of this kind of treatment. Your perspective would be valuable in developing training programs for our staff. David considered this. You want me to help train your employees? I want to create a real-world training scenario based on what happened yesterday. With your permission, I'd like to use the security footage and audio recordings to show our staff exactly how not to treat customers. Carmen added, we're also implementing a policy where any transaction that takes longer than 15 minutes automatically triggers supervisor involvement. And any customer who requests to speak with a manager must be accommodated immediately. What about compensation? Robert asked. Your time was wasted, your daughter was left waiting, and you were subjected to treatment that no customer should ever experience. David shook his head. I don't want money, but there is something you could do. Name it. I'd like you to consider offering financial literacy workshops in the community. A lot of small business owners, especially minority-owned businesses, avoid banks because they're intimidated or afraid of being judged. Maybe we can help change that. Robert smiled for the first time since the meeting began. I think that's an excellent idea. Would you be willing to help us develop and present those workshops? I'd be honored to. As the meeting wound down, David realized that something positive might actually come out of yesterday's terrible experience. The bank was taking the incident seriously, implementing real changes, and offering him a chance to help prevent similar situations for other customers. But as he drove back to his office, he couldn't stop thinking about the security footage Robert had shown him. The side-by-side comparison of how he'd been treated versus how the other customer had been treated was stark and undeniable. He pulled into his parking lot and sat in his car for a moment, processing everything that had happened in the past 24 hours. Yesterday, he'd been a successful businessman making a routine deposit. Today, he was apparently becoming the face of a bank's diversity training program. His phone buzzed with a text message from Carmen. David, I wanted you to know that several customers who witnessed yesterday's incident have called to complain about how you were treated. The community is paying attention to how we handle this. David smiled slightly as he read the message. Maybe the people recording with their phones hadn't been such a bad thing after all. Sometimes change only happens when people are watching. As he walked into his office, his assistant looked up with concern. Boss, there are 3 reporters here who want to talk to you about something that happened at the bank yesterday. David paused in the doorway. Apparently, the story was just getting started. 6 months had passed since the incident at First National Bank, and David was surprised by how much had changed. The story had indeed made local news, though David had kept his interviews brief and focused on the positive changes that had come out of the situation rather than dwelling on the negative experience itself. The bank had followed through on all of their promises. Mrs. Patterson had been quietly transferred to a different branch after completing extensive retraining. Lisa Chen had returned to work after her suspension and had actually become one of the bank's better customer service representatives. Frank Wilson had been replaced by a new security guard who greeted customers with a smile and actually remembered David's name. But the biggest change was the community financial literacy program that David and the bank had developed together. Every second Saturday of the month, the bank's community room hosted workshops for small business owners, teaching them about banking services, loan applications, and financial planning. This particular Saturday morning, David was setting up his laptop for the monthly workshop when Carmen Rodriguez approached him with a concerned expression. "David, there's someone here who wants to speak with you before the workshop starts. She says it's personal." David looked up from his computer to see a woman in her 30s standing near the back of the room. She was African American, well-dressed in business casual attire, and looked nervous as she watched him from a distance. "Should I know her?" David asked Carmen. "I think you should talk to her. Her name is Lisa Chen." David's eyebrows rose in surprise. Lisa looked very different from how he remembered her from that day 6 months ago. Her hair was styled differently, and she carried herself with a confidence that hadn't been there before. David walked over to where she was standing, and Lisa immediately looked down at the floor. "Mr. Johnson, I hope it's okay that I came today. I wanted to talk to you, but I wasn't sure if you'd want to see me." "It's fine, Lisa. What can I do for you?" She took a deep breath and looked up at him. "I wanted to apologize. I mean, really apologize, not just the corporate apology I gave you that day when everything came out." David gestured toward 2 chairs in the corner of the room where they could speak privately. "Okay, I'm listening." They sat down and Lisa clasped her hands in her lap. "I've been thinking about that day every single day for 6 months. At first I was angry and defensive. I thought everyone was overreacting, that I was just doing my job." She paused and took another deep breath. "But then I had to go through all that sensitivity training and they showed us the security footage. Watching myself treat you that way, seeing the comparison with how I treated other customers, it was horrible." David remained quiet, letting her continue. "The worst part was realizing that I wasn't just following procedures. I was making assumptions about you based on how you looked, how you were dressed, the color of your skin. I convinced myself that you must be up to something suspicious and I was determined to catch you." Lisa's voice started to shake slightly. "I grew up thinking I wasn't prejudiced. My family always taught me to treat everyone equally. But when I saw that footage, I had to face the fact that I had treated you like a criminal for no reason other than my own biases." "What made you decide to come here today?" David asked. "I've been following the financial literacy program in the news. I saw how you turned that horrible experience into something positive for the community, and I realized that I needed to do something more than just apologize." Lisa reached into her purse and pulled out a business card. "I left the bank 3 months ago. I'm working for a nonprofit now, Community Financial Services. We help low-income families and small business owners access banking services and understand their financial options." David looked at the business card in surprise. "You left banking?" "After everything that happened, I realized I needed to do something meaningful with my career. I couldn't just go back to business as usual behind a teller window." She leaned forward in her chair. "Mr. Johnson, would you consider letting me volunteer with your workshop program? I know I'm probably the last person you want to work with, but I think my perspective might be valuable." David studied her face, looking for any sign that this was just another performance. But Lisa's eyes were sincere, and her nervousness seemed genuine. "What would you want to contribute?" he asked. "I want to help other bank employees understand how their unconscious biases can affect their treatment of customers. I want to share my story, the real story about what it looks like when good people do terrible things because they're not examining their own assumptions." David was quiet for a long moment, considering her proposal. Around them, people were starting to arrive for the workshop, small business owners, young entrepreneurs, elderly customers trying to understand online banking. "Lisa, I appreciate your apology, and I respect what you're trying to do with your career now, but I need to ask you something directly. Anything. If I had walked into that bank 6 months ago wearing a 3-piece suit and carrying an expensive briefcase, would you have treated me the same way?" Lisa closed her eyes and was quiet for a long time. When she opened them again, there were tears starting to form. "No, I wouldn't have. And that's something I have to live with." David nodded. "I believe you're sincere about wanting to change. and I think your perspective could be valuable, but I need to know that you're committed to this for the long term, not just looking for a way to ease your guilt. I understand. What would you need from me to prove that? Start by volunteering with Community Financial Services for the next 6 months. Learn what it's really like to help people who've been shut out of traditional banking. If you're still interested in working with our program after that, we can talk again. Lisa nodded eagerly. I can do that. Thank you for even considering it. As she stood to leave, David called after her. Lisa? She turned back. What happened that day was wrong and it hurt me and my family. But the fact that you're here today, trying to make amends and change your life because of it, that means something. After Lisa left, David returned to setting up for the workshop. Carmen approached him again, this time with a curious expression. How did that go? She asked. Better than I expected. She seems genuinely committed to changing. Are you going to let her work with the program? David looked out at the community room, which was now filling with people eager to learn about financial services that many of them had been afraid to access before. The program had been more successful than anyone had anticipated, with a waiting list for each monthly session. Maybe eventually. People deserve second chances if they're willing to do the work to earn them. Carmen smiled. You know, when Robert first told me about your idea for these workshops, I wasn't sure how effective they'd be. But we've had over 300 people participate in the past 6 months. Some of them have opened their first business accounts. Others have applied for small business loans they never thought they could qualify for. That's what matters, David replied, making sure everyone feels welcome in places that should serve the whole community. As the workshop began, David looked out at the diverse group of participants, young and old, different ethnicities, various levels of business experience. 6 months ago, he'd been humiliated and treated like a criminal in this same building. Today, he was helping to create a space where everyone could learn and grow without fear of judgment. His phone buzzed with a text from his daughter. Dad, good luck with your workshop today. Mom and I are proud of what you're doing. David smiled as he read the message. His daughter had been old enough to understand what happened that day at the bank, and she'd watched as her father chose to respond with education and community building, rather than anger and lawsuits. As he began his presentation about small business banking basics, David reflected on how much his life had changed. The incident at the bank could have made him cynical and bitter. Instead, it had opened up opportunities to make a real difference in his community. And now, even Lisa Chen was trying to turn her mistake into something positive. Maybe that's how real change happened, not through punishment and shame, but through people recognizing their errors and committing to do better. The workshop was just beginning, but David could already see the engaged faces of the participants, eager to learn about financial opportunities that had previously seemed out of reach. This was why he'd started the program, and this was why he'd continue it, because everyone deserved to be treated with dignity and respect, whether they were making a routine deposit or asking questions about their first business loan. And if his terrible day at the bank could help ensure that more people received that treatment, then maybe something truly good had come out of that difficult experience after all. As David clicked to his first PowerPoint slide, he caught Carmen's eye and nodded toward the packed community room. She smiled back, understanding his unspoken message. This was what success looked like. Not revenge or punishment, but positive change that would outlast all of them. The workshop began, and David started teaching, knowing that in some small way, he was helping to build a more inclusive and welcoming community for everyone.